Korean Mafia boss, realized his black maid had been the only mother his 9-year-old son had ever known, but the boy was about to lose her forever. She was on her knees, folding the last of her clothes into a single battered suitcase, when the boy found her. He stood in the doorway of her small room at the far end of the hallway, the room with no window, the room that smelled like lavender because she kept a tiny sachet under her pillow. And he looked at her the way a child looks at something he cannot survive losing. His chin trembled, his small fists curled at his sides, and then he said the words that would change everything that happened next. "Amara, please don't go. You're my mom." If you've ever watched someone try not to cry and fail completely, you know what Amara's face looked like in that moment. She pressed her lips together. She closed her eyes. And then she opened them and looked at the boy. This 9-year-old boy who had been placed in her arms the night his mother disappeared. The night the world this child knew shattered beyond repair. And she said, very quietly, "I know, baby. I know." What she did not say, what she had never said to anyone in this house, was the truth. The real truth. The one that had been sitting inside her chest like a stone for 9 years, growing heavier every single day. And that truth? It was about to come out tonight, whether she wanted it to or not. Before we get into what happened next, I want you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Because if this kind of story, the kind that gets under your skin and stays there, is what you're looking for, you are exactly in the right place. Hit that button. Now let's go back to the beginning, because you need to understand how all of this started to understand why it almost ended the way it nearly did. Park Jin-soo was not a man you wanted to owe money to. In the world he operated in, a world of late-night meetings in private restaurant rooms, of briefcases passed between men who never made eye contact in public, of loyalty enforced not by law, but by consequence. He was known by a single word. Not his name, not his title. Just the word people used when they talked about him the way you talk about weather or gravity. Inevitable. He had built his operation from nothing. That was the thing people who feared him most often forgot to mention, that he had started with absolutely nothing. No family connections, no inherited territory, no mentor to show him the ropes. What he had was a mind that processed loyalty and betrayal the way a computer processes code, and a patience that was almost inhuman. He could wait. He could watch. He could hold a grievance for years and then act on it at the exact moment it would hurt the most. By the time he was 35, Park Jin-soo controlled a significant piece of a city that moved enormous amounts of money. He had properties. He had people. He had a penthouse apartment in the kind of building where the concierge pretended not to know what the residents did for a living. And he had a son, Min-jun. Min-jun arrived in Jin-soo's life the same way most things arrived, abruptly, and without asking permission. His mother was a woman named Seo-yeon, someone Jin-soo had been involved with during a period when he still believed he could keep two lives separate, the one the world saw and the one the world didn't. She was quiet and beautiful, and she had a way of looking at Jin-soo that made him feel, just briefly, like he wasn't the person he had spent 20 years becoming. When Min-jun was born, something shifted in Jin-soo. He didn't have a name for it. Men like him were not trained in the vocabulary of tenderness, but he felt it. This pull, this terrifying softness toward this small, screaming, unremarkable-looking infant who shared his jawline and his mother's dark, calm eyes. He felt it. And then, Seo-yeon disappeared. Not the way people disappear in Jin-soo's world. Not by force, not by consequence. She disappeared by choice. Left a note. 4 sentences. Said she loved Min-jun. Said she couldn't love Jin-soo. Said she was sorry. Said don't look for her. Jin-soo looked for her for 11 months. His people never found her. What he was left with was a newborn son, and a grief he didn't know what to do with, and an operation that couldn't afford the luxury of distraction. So he did what men like him do. He found a solution. A practical one. He hired Amara Mensah. Amara had come to this city 4 years before Min-jun was born, on a student visa that she'd extended twice, and then quietly allowed to lapse when the money ran out and the plan changed. She was 23 when she arrived, 27 when she answered the recruitment ad for a live-in housekeeper placed by a management company, not by Jin-soo directly. never directly, that asked for someone with experience in childcare, each household management, and, as the ad put it, discretion. She had all three. What the ad did not prepare her for was the apartment, the sheer scale of it, the marble floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city grid that glittered at night like something on fire, the kitchen with appliances she had only seen in magazines. She had stood in the entrance foyer during her interview with a woman named Ms. Choi, who handled all of Jinsu's domestic arrangements, and spoke to Amara in a clipped, efficient tone that made clear exactly what the hierarchy was, and she had thought, "This is not a house. This is a position." Ms. Choi had explained the rules. There were many of them. The apartment was to be kept immaculate. The child's schedule was to be followed precisely. Visitors to the apartment were to be treated with courtesy but never acknowledged by name, regardless of what name they gave. Amara was to have no social media. She was to tell no one the address where she worked. She was to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which a lawyer delivered to her before she started, and which she read 3 times before signing. And then Ms. Choi had said the last thing, the thing that was said in a tone so matter-of-fact that it sounded like a piece of furniture being described rather than a human arrangement. "Mr. Park is away frequently. The child's mother is not in the picture. You will be the boy's primary caregiver. Do you have any questions?" Amara had one question, but she didn't ask it. The question was, what happened to the mother? She didn't ask because she already understood that the answer lived somewhere she was not cleared to go. Instead, she said, "When do I start?" Minjun, at 2 weeks old, was the smallest, most furious thing Amara had ever held. He screamed with his whole body. He refused to sleep in the crib they had purchased, the kind that cost more than Amara's first car, and would only settle when pressed against a warm chest, listening to a heartbeat. His tiny fist would curl around whoever's finger was closest and grip it with a ferocity that seemed to say, "I am here, and I intend to stay." Amara fell in love with him on the 3rd night. She wasn't supposed to fall in love with him. That wasn't in the non-disclosure agreement. It wasn't the kind of thing that could be written into one. But it was, she understood instinctively, in the kind of thing that was not supposed to happen. You were hired help. You were staff. You were the person who warmed the bottles and folded the laundry and kept the calendar and made sure the child's homework was done before the tutor arrived on Thursdays. You were not supposed to become, quietly and entirely, and without anyone noticing, his mother. But grief has no interest in what is supposed to happen, and Minjun was a child who grieved without knowing he was grieving, who ached for something he had never held a memory of, whose whole small body seemed to ask a question he didn't have words for yet. And Amara, who had her own losses tucked away in the parts of her that she kept private, her own family far away, and her own sense of a life that had not gone the way the plan said it should, understood that ache in a way that had nothing to do with job description or monthly salary. So she stayed. Night after night, year after year. She learned his sounds before he learned his words. She was the one who sat with him during his first fever, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead while he looked up at her with those dark, trusting eyes. She was the one who taught him to read, pointing at the words slowly with a finger, sounding them out together. She was the one who held his hand crossing streets and tied his laces and cut the crusts off his sandwiches without him even having to ask, because she already knew. Jinsu was there, in the apartment, more than people might expect. He was not an absent father in the sense of someone who had simply walked away. And he came home. He ate dinner with his son, or tried to, when business allowed. He sat at Minjun's bedside when the boy was sick. He showed up for the school performances and the birthday parties and the moments that mattered. But there was always glass between Jinsu and his son. Some invisible thickness that Jinsu had built so gradually and so unconsciously that he didn't even realize it was there until he watched, from across the living room one evening, as Minjun ran not to him but to Amara when he scraped his knee on the coffee table corner. The boy ran to her, buried his face in the fabric of her apron, let her hold him and murmur and rock him gently while Jinsu stood with his hands at his sides and felt something that he couldn't name and didn't want to examine too closely. He watched that happen and he felt the glass and he said nothing. The trouble started with a man named Kang Taiwan. Kang Taiwan was Jinsu's second-in-command and had been for 6 years. He was the person Jinsu trusted with things that required trust, which, in Jinsu's world, was its own kind of risk. Because the more you trusted someone, the more they knew about what it would cost you to lose them. Kang knew routes, Kang knew names, Kang knew the location of things that were better left unfound, and Kang had started skimming. Not much at first, just enough to establish the habit. Then more, then substantially more. And he had been careful about it, which Jinsu would later think was actually the most insulting part. That Kang had underestimated him. Had believed, apparently, that Jinsu wouldn't notice. That the machine was big enough that a steady bleed could go undetected. It couldn't. Jinsu found out on a Tuesday. He sat with the information for exactly 4 days, the way a man sits with a terminal diagnosis. Processing, planning, deciding what he is willing to do next. Then he called a meeting and, in the quiet language of men who do not shout, he made clear to Kang exactly what he knew and exactly what the options were. Kang had nodded. Had said the things you say. Had, as Jinsu would discover 3 weeks later, immediately begun preparing his insurance policy. The insurance policy was Amara. Amara did not know she was an insurance policy. She did not know that Kang's people had been watching her for months, that someone had noted her undocumented immigration status, had photographed her entering and leaving the building, had assembled a quiet little file that outlined exactly what her position in this household meant to the man who ran it, and what it would mean to him if that position became complicated. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. It was slipped under the kitchen door, not the front door, the kitchen door, which opened onto the service corridor and was a detail that told Amara immediately that whoever had left it knew the building well. She almost didn't open it. She opened it. It was 2 paragraphs. No signature. The first paragraph explained what it knew about her. The immigration status. The length of time she had been here. The nature of her employment. The second paragraph was simple. Leave the apartment by end of the month. Tell no one why. Or this information goes to the authorities and to the media, and you face deportation. And the man you work for faces a scandal he cannot afford, and the boy faces losing you anyway, just in the worst possible way. Amara read the letter 3 times, then she folded it very carefully and placed it in the zippered inner pocket of her coat, the one she kept for things she needed to carry without showing. And then she went and she started making Minjun's breakfast, because it was 7:45 and he had school at 8:30, and none of it, could be allowed to touch his morning. She didn't tell Jinsu. That was the decision she made in the 20 seconds between reading the letter and walking to the kitchen. She didn't tell him because she was not certain, in those first hours, that the letter wasn't coming from Jinsu himself. That it wasn't his way of resolving a situation. Her, in his home. Her status, the way his son looked at her, that had perhaps become inconvenient. She needed to understand what she was dealing with before she handed the information to the person who might be the threat. So she began quietly, in the margins of her days, investigating. She knew the building. She knew the service corridor. She knew which cameras covered which angles. She knew, because she had spent 9 years absorbing the rhythms of this household, which faces were familiar, and which ones shouldn't be there. And within 4 days of watching, she identified the person who had delivered the letter. He was one of Kang's men. She recognized him from 2 visits to the apartment, 18 months apart, during which she had served tea and been invisible in the way staff are invisible, and had listened to everything while appearing to hear nothing. Now she understood it was not Jinsu who was threatening her. It was someone trying to use her to threaten Jinsu. And she understood something else. Something that settled into her chest like the sharp edge of a blade. They had chosen her because they believed Jinsu would not fight for her. That he would simply accept her departure. That whatever she meant to him was not enough to be a liability. They had calculated, correctly or incorrectly, that she was expendable. She sat with that for a long time. Then she packed her suitcase. She didn't pack it because she was giving in. She packed it because she needed to decide. Really decide. Clearly and with her eyes open, what she was willing to do next. And she found that she couldn't make that decision in the middle of the life. She needed to imagine the leaving, to feel the shape of it, to understand what she would be walking away from before she chose whether to walk. She had the suitcase open on her bed when Minjun found her. "Amara, please don't go. You're my mom." She did not know that Jinsu was standing 20 feet down the hallway, out of Minjun's sightline, inside the doorway of his own room. She did not know he had heard his son say those words. She did not know what those words did to Jinsu in the 10 seconds after they were spoken. The way they moved through him, the way they reached through all that glass he had built and cracked it. She only knew her boy was standing in front of her, and she was going to have to say something. "Come here," she said. Her voice was steady. It had taken years to make it that steady. She sat on the edge of the bed and held her arms open, and Minjun crossed the room and pressed himself against her, and she wrapped her arms around him and held him the way she had been holding him since he was 2 weeks old. "I'm not gone yet," she said. "Okay, I'm not gone yet. But you're packing." "I know." "Why?" She looked at the top of his head, at the place where his hair swirled in a small spiral. She had a name for that spiral. She had named it when he was a baby, during one of those 4 a.m. rocking sessions that had no audience and no record. She had called it his compass point. She had said, to no one, "I'm because no one was there. That's how I'll always find you." "Some things are complicated," she said. "But I need you to know something, and I need you to really hear it. Will you hear it?" He nodded against her chest. "I love you," she said. "Not like a housekeeper loves the family she works for. Not like someone who's paid to be here. I love you the way you said. Like a mom. I have loved you that way since you were so small I could hold all of you in one arm." He made a sound that was not quite a sob, more like something releasing, like pressure that had been held too long finding an exit. "So whatever happens," she said, "you keep that. You keep that, and you don't give it back." Jinsu had stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of that speech. He stood in the hallway and he listened, and he felt something happen to his face that he was very glad no one could see. He was a man who had, over the course of his adult life, made decisions that required him to remove his emotions from the equation with something close to surgical precision. He was good at it. He had trained himself to it. It was, in many ways, the reason he had survived as long and as successfully as he had. But there was no equation here. There was only his son and the woman who had loved his son every single day for 9 years, and a suitcase that was half-packed, and a question that Jinsu realized, standing in that hallway, he had never once asked himself. What was Amara to him? Not to Minjun. He knew the answer to that. He had just heard it, in his son's own trembling 9-year-old voice. But to him? What had he allowed her to be? What had he kept her from being? What had he refused to see because seeing it would require him to feel something he had decided long ago was not available to him anymore? He stepped back from the doorway. He walked to his office. He sat down at his desk and he did not look at the files in front of him. He looked at his own hands. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. By 11 o'clock that night, Jinsu knew about the letter. He knew about Kang's scheme. He knew about the file his second-in-command had built on Amara. He knew about the man who had delivered the envelope through the service corridor. He knew all of it, in the specific and actionable way that he knew things, not in pieces, but assembled, complete, with every strand identified and every implication mapped. He also knew something that none of Kang's calculations had accounted for. He was furious. Not the cold, managed fury that he usually operated within, the kind that was really just strategy wearing anger's clothing. This was something different, something that had a temperature to it, that moved in his chest like something living. Kang had reached into his home, had threatened someone in his home, had threatened her specifically because he believed she was the leverage, because he believed that Jinsu would rather lose her quietly than fight for her loudly. That miscalculation was going to be very expensive for Kang, but before that, before any of that, Jinsu needed to go down the hallway. He knocked on her door at 11:17. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, suitcase still half-packed, not progressing, just sitting. And she said, "Come in," in a voice that expected Miss Choi or possibly no one. When she saw it was him, she stood up, immediately, reflexively, 9 years of household hierarchy in a single motion. "Sit down," he said. His voice was quiet, not commanding, or at least, not commanding in the way he usually commanded. More like asking. She sat. He remained standing, which he realized halfway through was its own kind of power dynamic, and then he sat too, in the chair by the door, the small wooden chair that had lived in this room since before she moved into it. They looked at each other. "I know about the letter," he said. She went very still. "I know who sent it," he said. "I know why, and I need you to understand that it is being handled." "Handled?" she said. The word was careful. Neutral. A test. "He made a mistake," Jinsu said. "Using you. That was a mistake. It won't—" He stopped. Started again. "No one is going to threaten you in this house. That's not—" Another stop. He looked at his hands. He was, she realized, struggling. Not performing struggle. Actually struggling. "That is not something I will allow." "Mr. Park," she said. She had called him that for 9 years, and the name felt, in this room, at this hour, like a costume that no longer fit either of them. "I wasn't going to leave because of the letter." He looked up. "I mean, I was considering it. I weighed it. Because the letter was correct about one thing. My status is complicated, and if it became public, it would be difficult for you. For Minjun." She said his son's name the way people say the name of something they hold sacred. "I didn't want to be a problem. And I've spent 9 years trying very hard not to be a problem." "You are not a problem," he said. The words came out fast, like they had been waiting. "No," she said. "But I might become one. And that matters to me more than—" She pressed her lips together. "It matters more than staying." "More than Minjun?" The question was not an accusation, it was genuine. He genuinely wanted to know. "Minjun is the reason I would leave," she said, very quietly. "Not the reason I would stay." The room held that sentence for a moment. "I don't understand," he said. "If staying is going to cost him something," she said. "If it's going to bring something dangerous into his life, if it's going to put him in the middle of a problem that is mine, then leaving is the thing I do for him. That's what you do for someone you love. How do you protect them even when the protecting is the hardest thing?" Jinsu was quiet for a long time. Outside the window of her small room, the room with no window, she had said, but actually there was one small window, facing the inner courtyard. She could see the orange glow of the city against the dark. "I heard him," Jinsu said finally. "Minjun, in the hallway. I heard what he said to you." She went still again. "And I heard what you said back." She looked at him. She was braced for something. She had spent her life in spaces where she braced, where she prepared for outcomes that cost her rather than the other way around. But his face, in this light, at this hour, was not the face he wore in the rest of the apartment. Something had come off of it. Something he usually kept on. "I have never thanked you," he said. "In 9 years. I have paid you. I have—" He made a brief, dismissive gesture. "Renewed your contract and increased your salary, and provided you with certain practical arrangements. But I have never once said the words." "You didn't need to," she said. "That is not what I'm asking you to tell me," he said. "I'm telling you that I didn't, that I was wrong not to. That you gave my son something I didn't know how to give him, and I watched you do it for 9 years, and I kept it at a distance because that was—" He exhaled. "That was easier for me, and the things that are easy for me are very often not the things that are right." If you're still watching this right now, you are exactly the person this channel was made for. Because this is where the story gets complicated. This is where the truth that Amara had been carrying, the one she had been protecting, the one that was about to decide everything, this is where it starts to surface. Subscribe before we go further. Because what she's about to tell him changes every single thing you think you know about this story. She reached into the inner pocket of her coat, which was hanging on the back of the door. She pulled out the letter. She handed it to Jinsu. He read it. His face, already stripped of its usual armor, moved through several things she could not fully name. "There is something else," she said. He looked up. "The letter is true," she said. "About my status. But there's something the letter doesn't know. Something almost no one knows." She paused. 9 years ago, when Ms. Choi hired me, she ran background checks. Standard ones. They came back clear because the name she checked wasn't the name I was born with. Jin-soo was very still now. When I came to this country, she said, I came with a cousin who had legal status. There was an arrangement. A temporary one, we thought. I used her documentation to get my first employment on record. It was supposed to be short-term. She said the next sentence with a steadiness that had cost her years to develop. It was not short-term. The name on your contract, Jin-soo said slowly, is my cousin's name, yes. Silence. Why are you telling me this? His voice was careful, not threatening, genuinely asking. Because you told me you watched me for 9 years and kept it at a distance, she said. And I have done the same thing to you. I have been in this house, with your son, and there has been a wall of things unsaid and I am tired. Her voice didn't break. It simply got quieter. I am tired of carrying things that were supposed to be temporary. And the truth about Minjun? He said. She went completely still. He said it again, more carefully. Is there a truth about Minjun? She looked at him for a long time, and then she said, Minjun's mother did not choose to disappear. The air in the room changed. What do you know about Seoyeon? He said. And now his voice was something else entirely, layered, dangerous in the old way, with an old pain underneath it that she recognized because she had spent 9 years watching him carry it without putting it down. I know, she said very carefully, that she contacted me. 3 months after I started working here. She had people watching the building, making sure Minjun was safe, and she found me through them. She called me. Amara's hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still, the way she kept things when they were at risk of falling. She didn't tell me everything, but she told me enough. She told you she left voluntarily, Jin-soo said. It was not quite a question. She told me, Amara said, that she left because someone told her that if she stayed, Minjun would be used against you, the same way Kang just tried to use me against you. She let that settle. She didn't leave you because she wanted to. She left because someone convinced her it was the only way to protect the boy. She left to remove herself as a liability. The silence that followed this was the longest one of the evening. Who told her that? Jin-soo said. And, Amara told him. The name was not Kang's. It was older than Kang. It was a name from before Kang, from the early days of Jin-soo's operation, from a time when the power structure looked very different. A name that belonged to someone who had since become something very close to a fixture. Trusted. Background. Unremarkable. The kind of person you stop noticing because they have always been there. The kind of person who was, therefore, never suspected. Jin-soo did not move for a long time after she said the name. Then he said, How long have you known? She told me in pieces, Amara said. Over years. Phone calls, every few months. She would call to ask about Minjun, how he was sleeping, what he was eating, whether he was happy. Her voice carried something enormous very quietly. I would tell her. She would cry a little, is always, where she thought I couldn't hear it. And she would tell me things. Not everything. But enough. Where is she? He said. I don't know, Amara said. The calls stopped 2 years ago. I don't know what happened. I have been afraid to find out. Another long quiet. You have been carrying this, Jin-soo said, for 9 years. You have been carrying this and staying and saying nothing. Minjun needed stability, she said simply. He needed things to stay the same. He needed to not be in the middle of something that could consume him. So I stayed. And I kept it. And Her voice was still steady, still quiet. I told myself every year that next year I would tell you, and every year, it was not the right time. What made tonight the right time? He said. She looked at the suitcase. Because I was leaving, she said, and I couldn't leave with it still inside me. I couldn't walk out of this house and leave you not knowing. Whatever else I am not. I cannot be someone who chose my own safety over what this family deserved to know. Jin-soo stood up. He walked to the small window and he looked at the orange glow of the courtyard, the same glow she had been looking at. and he stood there for a long time with his back to her. She watched his reflection in the glass. When he turned around, he looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just, in this room, at this hour, been offered the possibility of setting it down. "Close the suitcase," he said. She looked at him. "Not. I am not ordering you." He made a small, almost helpless gesture. "I am asking. Please, close the suitcase." She looked at the half-packed bag, at the carefully folded clothes, at the lavender sachet sitting on top, the one from under her pillow, the one she had packed first without thinking, because some things you reach for automatically. She reached over and unzipped the top. She took out the lavender sachet. She set it on the nightstand. She zipped the suitcase closed. They talked until 3 in the morning. Not about the operation, or Kang, or the old name she had given him. Those things would be dealt with in their own time, in the language of that world, and they would be dealt with completely. But that was not what needed to happen in this room tonight. What needed to happen was the conversation they should have had 5 years ago. 4 years ago. Every year for 9 years when they had sat on opposite sides of the glass, Jin-soo had built and communicated through Ms. Choi and maintained the architecture of employer and employee as though it were a load-bearing wall when it was, they now understood, more like a window blind, something that could simply be rolled up. He told her about Seoyeon, not the facts. She knew the facts, but the feeling. What it had been like to be left. To look at Minjun's face and see her eyes and not know if she was alive, to carry that alongside everything else. She told him about her family, her mother, who was still alive, far away, who knew her daughter worked for a wealthy family in a foreign city, and who prayed for her every day, not knowing the details and not needing to. Her sister, who had the life that Amara had originally planned for herself. The law degree that had become, in the series of events that led her here, a credential without a profession. She told him, very carefully, about loving Minjun. He listened. He said, "I think I always knew that you loved him that way. I think I watched it happen, and I kept myself separate from it because, if I was separate from it, I didn't have to feel what it meant that he had you, and didn't have her." "You didn't have to choose between them," she said. "Yes. You were not the one who left," she said. Whatever someone told her, whatever she believed she was doing, you were not the one who made that choice. He absorbed that. "Minjun needs you to know that," she said. "Not now. Not when he's 9. But someday. He needs to know that his father didn't make his mother go. He needs the truth to be available to him when he's old enough to hold it. And he needs you," Jin-soo said. "Not as a concession, as an understanding. He needs both of us to stop pretending," she said, "that this household is one thing when it's actually something else." The next morning, Jin-soo sat across the breakfast table from his son. Minjun ate his toast in the careful, precise way he always ate, tearing off pieces, eating the middle before the crust, a ritual he'd had since he was 4, and which Amara had documented in her own memory, with the devotion of someone who knew that the small things were the actual things. Amara stood at the counter with her tea. Jin-soo said, "Minjun." Minjun looked up. "Amara is not leaving," Jin-soo said. Minjun looked from his father to Amara and back. 9 years old, with his father's jaw and his mother's eyes and his own quiet, watchful intelligence that was entirely his own. "Okay," he said. Then, "Did you ask her to stay?" Jin-soo paused. He looked at Amara. Something passed between them. Not quite a smile, not quite anything nameable, but real. "Yes," he said. "I asked her." "Good," said Minjun and went back to his toast. As though this were the resolution he had always expected, had simply been waiting for the adults to catch up to. It took 2 more months for the other things to resolve. Kang made the choices men make when they have been caught and are afraid. Choices that were ultimately very bad for Kang and very clarifying for the people around Jin-soo. The old name Amara had given him, the one older than Kang, Isha the one in the background, was confronted with what was known and made their own choices under that pressure. And the picture that emerged was one that Jin-soo would spend a long time sitting with, because it changed the map of the past decade. Amara's legal situation was addressed through a process that took time and required patience and cost something, but not as much as it might have, and resulted in a status that was hers and not borrowed and not temporary. She understood, going through this process, that Jinsu had used resources to help without making it transactional, without saying, "I did this for you," in a way that created debt. She noted this, and held it the way she held things she needed to understand slowly. Seoyeon was found. She was alive. She was in a city not so very far away, as it turned out. She had been alive all along, living quietly, receiving secondhand news of Minjun's life through people she trusted, crying alone over photographs she found online of a school performance or a park outing, loving her son from a distance that had been sold to her as safety and had become, over the years, a prison of her own compliance. She and Jinsu spoke. Once, on the phone, for a long time. Then again. The conversation was not easy and was not resolved in an evening, but it was had. And it was real. And it began something that was not reconciliation. They were too far from each other for that word to apply cleanly, but was perhaps the beginning of a truth that Minjun deserved access to. That conversation would happen eventually. Not at 9, but the door was open, and Minjun, when he was old enough to walk through it, Na would find that the adults in his life had not kept him from his own story, that they had simply made sure he was old enough and safe enough and loved enough to receive it. On a Saturday 6 months later, Amara sat on the floor of Minjun's room while he showed her something on a tablet, a video about deep-sea creatures that he had become suddenly and completely obsessed with. He lay on his stomach with the tablet propped on a pillow, narrating in a voice that was half reading and half performing, adding commentary that was funnier than he probably realized. She sat with her back against his bed, tea cooling beside her, and she listened. Jinsu appeared in the doorway. He did that sometimes now, stood in doorways. Not in the old way, the way he had stood in the hallway the night she was packing, watching from behind glass. Hang in a different way, present. In the room, even when he was standing at the threshold, Minjun noticed him and said, "Appa, come see this one, the anglerfish is terrifying, look at its teeth." And Jinsu crossed the room and sat on the floor too, on Minjun's other side, and looked at the anglerfish, and said something about the teeth that made Minjun laugh. Amara looked at the three of them in the screen's reflection. This boy, this complicated man herself. And she thought about all the years of things unspoken. All the things she had carried and the things he had carried and the things they had kept from each other in the name of practicality or hierarchy or simple human fear. She thought about the lavender sachet, back under her pillow where it belonged. She thought about the compass point in Minjun's hair, and how she had said once, to no one, in the dark, "That's how I'll always find you." She found him. Every day, she found him. And now the room was a little fuller and the glass was a little thinner, and the things unspoken were fewer than they had ever been. It was not a perfect story. It was not the kind of story that resolved into something clean and unambiguous, and without the marks of everything it had been through. The marks were there. They would always be there. That was not failure. That was the shape of something real. There is a particular kind of love that does not announce itself, that does not arrive with ceremony or claim or the vocabulary we associate with belonging. It moves in quietly. It folds the laundry and ties the laces and sits on the floor of a child's room on a Saturday afternoon and simply stays. It asks nothing in return because it is not that kind of love. It is the kind that simply continues, regardless of category, regardless of contract, regardless of every reasonable reason to stop. That is the love Amara Mensah brought into a penthouse apartment 9 years ago when she was 27 years old and had no idea what she was walking into. And that is the love that, in the end, was the one thing Kang had not calculated, the one thing Jinsu's glass had not accounted for, the one thing that the letter, and the file, and all the machinery of threat and leverage could not reach. Because you cannot threaten someone with the loss of something they have already made irreplaceable. You cannot remove what has already become the center. Minjun knew that. He had always known it. He knew it the way children know things that adults take decades to understand, not with analysis, but with the body, with the part of you that runs in the direction of what it needs when it is hurt. He ran to her. He had always run to her, and she had always been there. And now, finally, after 9 years and a suitcase and a letter and a night of truth and a morning of small mercies, so had his father. If this story found something in you, if it moved something in you that you weren't expecting, that's what this channel is here for. We tell the stories that take the long way around to the truest things, the stories about what people protect and what they hide, and what happens when those two things finally meet. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because every single story we tell here is told the same way Amara loved that boy, completely, and without holding anything back.